Welcome to our discussion on the striking series of environmental policy rollbacks since 2025, characterized by a dramatic shift towards fossil fuel expansion.
I'm really eager to dive into this. So many actions have far-reaching consequences.
Absolutely. Let's start with the reopening of coal plants. Soon after Trump's return, an emergency order kept the J.H. Campbell coal power plant in Michigan running well past its planned retirement, despite no local demand for it. This choice wasn't made lightly. It involved massive coal transport from Colorado via 100-car trains, ultimately clogging roads and soiling the air in multiple states.
That sounds like a logistical nightmare, as well as an environmental setback.
Exactly. And it gets even more interesting, or dangerous, depending on your perspective. The policy not only impacted air quality, but is also projected to cost Midwest consumers tens of millions of dollars while undercutting a shift to renewable
that's a tough
energies.
pill to swallow. It kind of makes you wonder, isn't this decision more about boosting fossil fuels than public interest?
Right. Pressure to expand fossil fuels was a consistent theme throughout these actions. After this, the administration proceeded with rollbacks on emissions regulations. They suspended methane emission rules for oil and gas, allowing companies to release an abundance of this potent greenhouse gas without updated monitoring systems.
Yeah, that's a significant step back, right? Absolutely, because methane is a major driver of climate change, even if it's less talked about than carbon dioxide.
And speaking of setbacks, new federal reviews were ordered to indefinitely pause offshore wind projects along the east and west coasts. These reviews delayed or even canceled projects that were already approved, which has sent ripples through the renewable energy market.
It's like the deck's been stacked against progress. It almost sounds like every green initiative is getting a hurdle, doesn't it?
Precisely. And if that wasn't enough, tariffs on imported solar panels were reinstated. This move not only slowed the expansion of solar capacity nationwide, but also drove up installation costs, a double blow for the green energy
transition. Right, so there's both a supply chain issue and a financial barrier.
Now, the impact of these actions isn't limited to domestic energy policies. On the international stage, the administration withdrew from the Paris Climate Agreement in early 2025, the same agreement the U.S. had recently rejoined under the previous administration.
That's a real blow to America's global standing.
Absolutely, and withdrawing not only undercuts global collaborative efforts, but it undermines the credibility of U.S. environmental efforts internationally. It's a decision that could resonate for generations, affecting global climate commitments.
And it sends a chilling message to allies and adversaries alike. So why do you think this shift back from international cooperation was pursued?
Well, it appears to be a deliberate reprioritization, favoring short-term fossil fuel gains over long-term environmental stability. It's like the president was trying to double down on domestic fossil fuel interests, regardless of the international
That certainly
implications.
seems to be the case.
Now let's talk about the drastic changes within federal agencies. The EPA, for instance, underwent severe cuts in both staffing and budget. The intent, it seems, was to markedly reduce its ability to enforce environmental laws across the board.
Yeah, that really weakens the regulatory framework.
Many inspectors and scientists lost their positions or were reassigned to less impactful roles, which severely hampered environmental reviews for major projects like pipelines, chemical plants, and industrial facilities.
Right, and without vigilant oversight, risks just multiply. I mean, wouldn't you argue that these staffing cuts and budget slashes might have been, overzealous? I feel like there might have been a middle ground rather than an absolute gutting of the EPA.
That's a fair point. While some argue that streamlining regulatory agencies could boost efficiency, the scale and speed of these cuts raise real concerns about neglect and, frankly, long-term public health risks.
Yeah, it seems like a risky gamble with consequences that extend far beyond immediate cost savings.
Alongside the EPA cuts, there's also been a significant rollback on clean water protections. The redefinition of which waterways and wetlands receive federal protection means more industrial and agricultural runoff is likely to pollute these resources jeopardizing both ecosystems and public health.
That's a concerning development. With such deregulatory measures, it feels like natural resources are being sacrificed for industrial convenience.
Yeah. And the rollback also extends to electric vehicles. Tax incentives for EV purchases have been pulled back, and fuel efficiency standards for cars and trucks remain frozen. This, in turn, delays the necessary shift away from internal combustion engines in favor of cleaner transportation methods.
Right? And that puts the U.S. at a competitive disadvantage globally.
Exactly. While other nations ramp up EV adoption, America is effectively stepping on the brakes. It's like trying to drive a car with the parking brake on.
Haha, yeah, that analogy really hits home.
But wait, there's more. Vast stretches of public lands, including wildlife refuges, have been opened up to oil and gas leasing. This means that areas once off limits are now primed for drilling, posing serious threats to biodiversity and carbon storage.
That stretch of policy is like throwing fuel on a fire, isn't it? It's a stark reversal from decades of conservation efforts.
Yes, indeed. And then there's the issue of climate science itself being sidelined. Government websites have scrubbed references to climate change, and agencies have been actively instructed to avoid using the term. Scientific research faces significant funding cuts, and there have been reports of political pressure to downplay or suppress climate data.
Right, that censorship creates enormous gaps in public understanding and policymaking.
Finally, we see a reduction in disaster resilience efforts. Funding for FEMA's climate resilience programs has been slashed, and infrastructure investments now often ignore climate-related risks. This leaves vulnerable communities less prepared for disasters like floods, wildfires, and hurricanes, a worrying prospect as extreme weather events become more frequent.
Being caught unprepared could have dire consequences in the long term. When you hear all these comprehensive rollbacks, it's almost staggering how many levers have been pulled at once. Where do you see the most immediate impact?
Honestly, it's a mix of both immediate and long-term impacts. The reopening of coal plants and suspension of emissions rules are already degrading air quality and habitable conditions in affected communities. Meanwhile, delays on green technologies like EVs and renewable energy projects slow down the necessary transition to a sustainable future.
Yeah, it's like cutting off oxygen while trying to run a marathon.
Right. And if you think about it, these actions collectively represent, well, a systematic retreat from environmental progress. The shift isn't just about a couple of policies. It's a comprehensive reorientation away from the clean energy trajectory that previous decades had painstakingly
built up. And the long-term cost
up.
goes well beyond dollars, touching on ecosystems, health, and global competitiveness. Do you think there's any political or public pushback that could stem this tide?
There is some buzz in the media and within environmental advocacy circles. However, the political momentum behind fossil fuel interests remains entrenched in certain areas, making sudden policy reversals unlikely.
It almost feels like an uphill battle for environmental advocates.
Exactly. And while some critics argue that deregulation might spur economic growth or benefit the auto and energy industries, the data shows otherwise in terms of environmental degradation and long-term economic risks.
Yeah, it's like balancing short-term economic interests against long-term sustainability. And there's the perspective that priorities might have been set differently. Maybe aiming for energy independence today versus climate security tomorrow. Yet, this strategy seems to undermine global climate efforts.
Precisely. It's a trade-off with hefty risks. On one side, you get immediate gains for fossil fuel industries. On the other, you face ecological collapse, increased pollution, and a stunted clean energy revolution, which could cost future generations dearly.
That trade-off doesn't really add up if you think about long-term health of the planet.
To sum it up, these policy reversals, ranging from the extension of coal power to the chilling suppression of climate science, paint a picture of a deliberate pivot away from environmental stewardship.
And the ramifications will likely ripple through economics, public health, and international relations in ways we're only beginning to grasp. It certainly makes one wonder, what will this mean for environmental policy in the coming decades, especially as global temperatures continue to rise?
Well, the hope is that as the negative impacts become more evident through extreme weather events and mounting public pressure, there could be a recalibration. But as it stands, this era marks a significant retreat from decades of progress in mitigating climate change.
And that recalibration might, unfortunately, come too late for many vulnerable communities. It's a sobering look at how political shifts can fundamentally alter environmental trajectories.
Indeed, and it reinforces the need for informed, science-driven policymaking if we're to protect our planet for future generations. Thanks for the engaging discussion. There's a lot here to chew on.
Absolutely. Thanks for breaking it all down. This conversation is a stark reminder why keeping an eye on environmental policies is so crucial.